So we will go ahead and listen in now.
And I also want to note that this is the 15th execution carried out during Attorney General Marshall's and during this tenure. Our team boasts a 99% success rate at the United States Supreme Court. All right, so with that, I'll turn it over.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Let me start by saying what you've heard me say many times before, and that is that I can hardly call this execution justice for the Senate family. And it's because it took over 3.5 decades for the sentence to be carried out. I want to tell the family, especially the victims' sons, Mike and Chuck, how genuinely sorry I am for the horrific manner in which their mother lost her life. But I also want to apologize to them for how long it took for this sentence to be carried out. I watched the family address the media last night, in which they showed remarkable humility and grace in the most difficult circumstances that no one else would want to be in. But you know that forgiveness and justice are not mutually exclusive, and their words will stick with me for a long time. I hope the family has taken some comfort in the events of last night in knowing that there were men and women in this office who did not back away when it would have been easy to do so, and other states may have done the same thing, but instead they continued to fight. Our capital litigators have handled this case for more than 30+ years. They could have followed the path of other states and gone the path of least resistance, and that would have been easier. But yet I can't think of a better group of lawyers to be able to handle this case. And as the numbers prove, they're the best team of capital litigators in the country, bar none, and I could not be prouder of the work they've done. Rich Anderson, thank you. I also want to acknowledge the incredible work of our Solicitor General's division. They get these cases across the finish line every time, and they do it better than anyone in the country. And a tremendous thanks to Commissioner John Hamm and his dedicated team at the Alabama Department of Corrections. Everyone in this room knows they are the first team in the country to carry out nitrogen execution, and what occurred last night was textbook. They deserve a great deal of thanks and credit for being willing to be the one to step up first in the country to do so, and I now suspect that many states will follow. As of last night, nitrogen hypoxia as a means of execution is no longer an untested method. It is a proven one. And it's the method that Kenneth Smith ultimately chose, along with now 43 other death row inmates in our state. And thanks to the Fair Justice Act, which our administration passed during our first year in office, we are finally starting to see these cases move faster. It is my hope that one day, sooner rather than later, that the Alabama Attorney General won't have to stand up here and talk about how many decades some families had to wait before justice was served. To my colleagues across the country, many of which were watching last night, Alabama has done it, and now so can you. And we stand ready to assist you in implementing this method in your states. With that, happy to answer any questions.
And is that contrary to your office claim that he would lose consciousness quickly and this would be the most humane and painless method?
First of all, the execution last night was not at all contrary to anything that we filed, but in fact was entirely consistent, not only with what we filed, but also the experts that were retained on behalf of Mr. Smith. As you heard earlier, there's no specific time that we can identify for which the nitrogen began to flow. And so identifying that time, no one can do. But we believe that not only was this constitutionally carried out, but entirely consistent with how it was planned from the beginning. I mean, ultimately, the Department of Corrections will know exactly when that started. I don't have knowledge of that. But obviously, from the witnesses that were there, they're aware of the circumstances that took place beforehand, including the last words that were spoken by Mr. Smith, and it was shortly after that that process began, but I can't give you that specific. Yes, sir.
What would you have considered unsuccessful in this case?
We did not provide justice for this family. Complied with the Constitution in the carrying out of this process. Mr. Smith was given due process through the courts to be able to have his arguments heard. We prevailed, and justice occurred for that family last night. I personally haven't. I was able to see the remarks of Commissioner Ham last night. Again, to commend his team for the process that they operated under, for the professional manner in which they carried out this execution, and pleased with how they were able to handle it. All I've seen are their remarks, and again, remarkable grace and humility that they showed last night. But I think they were also very clear. They received the justice that their mother deserved for the events that occurred in her horrific death. And the one thing that we cannot lose sight of, majority of the questions that we've had here today have dealt with Mr. Smith. We cannot lose sight of the fact that a woman was brutally murdered, taken from her family, and that's the reason why the state of Alabama had to act last night. Let's remember her legacy and her life as much as we remember the person who took her away from us. I personally haven't, but members of my staff have, and they clearly, other states were watching what was taking place last night. The expert for the defendant himself talked about involuntary movements taking place with this process, and that's exactly what occurred last night. I think we will definitely have more nitrogen hypoxia executions in Alabama. I believe that number is 43, but we can get you there. Not availability is the choice of the particular inmate. They had the opportunity for that election, and we stand ready to proceed on both. Most of those elections took place several years ago when the legislature first adopted the act that allowed this to take place. We have a quota for Kim for you. Sorry. Go ahead.
This is the first new execution method since lethal injection was introduced in 1952. It was considered separate from gas, which was previously used. Do you think this is going to radically alter the capital punishment landscape in the U.S.?
I think it provides an opportunity for states to choose this method. Whether they'll do so, that's going to be up to them. We obviously know Mississippi and Oklahoma have chosen this as an appropriate method, and I do believe, based on feedback I've received, that other states will follow suit.
Out of other states in terms of their feedback to this that you say they want to go forward with as well?
I think clearly they were watching what took place, wanted to see how it was able to occur in Alabama. And at this point, we'll continue to offer not only our services and the experience that we've had with this, but also I'm sure our Department of Corrections will cooperate as well to the extent that they want to go. Thanks, everybody, for your time.
We are wrapping up a press conference that just wrapped up with Attorney General Steve Marshall. He addressed the press and talked about the execution of Kenneth Smith. And keep in mind, I'll go ahead and pull up a mugshot. Kenneth Smith was successfully executed last night by nitrogen hypoxia. It was the first execution in the country by those means, by that method. A 58-year-old Kenneth Eugene Smith was pronounced dead around 8:25 last night. Now, Attorney General Steve Marshall, he was very clear on some things. He said that Mike and Chuck, those are the sons of Elizabeth Sinnott, who was killed by Kenneth Smith. Kenneth Smith was convicted of her murder for hire, of Elizabeth Sinnott. And so he talked about Mike and Chuck and getting justice for the sons of Elizabeth Sinnott. He also talked about, he wanted people to remember her life and legacy while we are focused on this being the first in the country execution by nitrogen hypoxia. He also thanked ADOC, the attorneys who've worked on this case. He also mentioned that this is no longer an untested method, but a proven method. Of course, we will continue to have updates online and on air regarding this, and have more comments from Attorney General more in depth, so you can take a look if you missed any of that press conference. Thank you for joining us in the WSFA Digital Desk.